Hello and welcome to this podcast from the BBC World Service. Please let us know what you think and tell other people about us on social media. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
Getting paid up to 2 days early with direct deposit is another reason banking with Capital One is one of the easiest decisions in the history of decisions. Even easier than deciding to listen to another episode of your favorite podcast. And with no fees or minimums on checking and savings accounts, is it even a decision? That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com/bank. Capital One N.A. member FDIC.
Hello and welcome to News Hour from the BBC World Service, coming to you live from our studios in central London. I'm Julian Marshall. It was back to school in Afghanistan on Saturday, but only if you were a boy. The Taliban Education Ministry announced the reopening of secondary schools without mentioning girls or female teachers. Kharid Saeed Khosti is a member of the Taliban Cultural Commission.
Perhaps it will be clarified later about the reopening of the girls' schools, what mechanism the elders will agree on, or whether separate classes will be provided for them. And we will take care of the facilities ourselves.
But the United Nations is not prepared to wait for later. It's urged the Taliban to reopen girls' secondary schools without delay, saying a ban on their education would be a violation of their fundamental rights. And, of course, those rights were violated when the Taliban last ruled in Afghanistan in the 1990s. Most girls then were not allowed to go to school. Samantha Mort from the United Nations Children's Fund in Kabul told the BBC there had been huge progress over the past 20 years.
It is absolutely vital that we preserve those gains, especially now when we have lost so many talented young people in the last few weeks through evacuation. It is critical, if there's going to be a peaceful, productive and prosperous Afghanistan, that all its young people are schooled and productive.
And Pashtana Durrani is executive director of the non-profit educational charity Learn in Afghanistan. Her reaction to the Taliban's failure to ask girls to go back to school.
It's like, at the same time, when they are saying that boys should return and there's no notion of girls being returning or being banned or something like that, it sets in that sort of excuse, or like they want to see what sort of backlash will they see, what sort of, international pressure they will see. They're just testing the waters. It's that simple. And when you don't see girls, you definitely know that, that's what they wanted in the first place. It's literally when they are waging a war against girls from class 7 until class 12. Like, can you imagine someone who has taken over all Afghanistan is waging a war against girls in their teens?
Because the United Nations has urged the Taliban to reopen girls' secondary schools without delay. Is that the kind of international pressure you were talking about? Is that likely to make any kind of difference?
I don't think so, because United Nations has been saying, there should be a reduction in violence, there should be ceasefire, blah, blah, blah. But in the past 20 years, have you seen that any of those things have worked? No. So I don't think the United Nations can or has that role to play. Of course, once the schools resume, then UN can work on the ground and maybe make sure that there is a sustainable plan for the future. But right now, the only leverage that the whole world has against them is the US government and all those people giving them the aid. They want to see what aid they get and what will be simple strings attached to those. And they're seeing if the girls' education is one of those strings that people are trying to let go of. That's simple.
So you're saying almost as if the Taliban are using girls' education as a bargaining tool with the international community.
Definitely. Didn't you see it that they want their legitimacy and they're using every other string to just why are still women still at home and working from home or remotely or not even working? Why are they not resuming their jobs? If they respected every other right, as they said, they would have let the women work. Why are they using that as a bargaining chip to be recognized or to get more aid? Don't you see that? It's the same for girls' education and the same for humanitarian crisis, to be honest.
You must know dozens of girls who were really looking forward to going back to school.
Oh, I definitely know dozens of girls who would love to go back to school. And I know a few hundred teachers who would love to resume their jobs because they are the breadwinners of their family and they love teaching. And at the moment, none of that is happening.
So if this ban continues, it's going to have a massive impact, isn't it, on girls, on women in Afghanistan?
Yes, definitely. They're going to have a massive impact. It's like, cutting off the 50% of the country, asking half of the country to sit at home and then not even think about the future, not even be hopeful about the future. So let's say that there will be crisis on medical front in the next 3 to 4 years because the girls who were in grade 7 or 8 or 9 and up until 12, they won't be graduating from high school. So they don't have certificates to enroll into post-high school studies. And that means no midwives, no healthcare workers, no teachers, which means in the next 5 years, the population grows, but we don't have midwives to give service to them. We don't have teachers to teach. We don't have doctors to attend to. So that way we go into a long-term humanitarian, but also at the same time medical and public administrative crisis. They are just shooting themselves in the foot when they are doing this because the more girls graduate, the more they will enroll in colleges, the more they will become professionals. And the more they will be paying taxes, that will be helping sustain the country where we won't be needing a lot of aid. I just don't understand the notion where they think it's totally okay. If they're using Sharia or Islam, that doesn't justify it. I'm a Muslim. I don't see anywhere where they have seen specific said that, okay, from class 6, you can't study further for girls. It's not possible. What are they trying to give a message? It's just their patriarchal, egoistic mentality that they want to impose on everyone.
Do you think there's any kind of debate going on within the Taliban, any ideological, any religious debate about this particular topic?
Yes, sources at the moment tell me the political faction are trying to be as moderate as possible for legitimacy, for aid and all that. And then there is the military faction, which is trying so hard to hold on to their ideology for 2 reasons. A, so that their foot soldiers don't become alienated. B, because if they lose that sort of morale, they lose their legitimacy within their own group. They lose that popularity.
That was Pashtana Durrani, Executive Director of the non-profit educational charity Learn in Afghanistan. And we go now to Mexico and an initial investigation into the collapse of an overpass on Mexico City's metro system in May, in which 26 people were killed, has found serious flaws in the line's construction. Specifically, it's believed that metal studs, which connected metal beams to a concrete slab, were not properly welded and may have caused the overpass to collapse. Among the figures under pressure are the former Mexico City Mayor, Marcelo Ebrard, and one of the richest men in the world, Carlos Slim, whose company built the line. The Attorney General's office is still investigating whether there was any criminal liability. The victims' families, who allege that repeated warnings about Line 12 were ignored, know that bringing a case against some of Mexico's most powerful people is a daunting task. Will Grant reports from Mexico City.
In a slickly produced launch video, Mexico City's Line 12 was heralded as the newest, cleanest and supposedly safest metro line in the capital when it was unveiled under a decade ago. In the promotional film, the city government used words like pioneering and efficient and showed images of cutting-edge technology. In fact, it was referred to as Mexico City's Golden Line. Today, those government claims of safety and modernity ring hollow. Line 12 now synonymous with disaster after 26 people died in May when a train travelling across an overpass collapsed onto the traffic below. In a preliminary report, the awful incident was blamed on multiple construction errors. Around a month after the accident, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said he would personally take responsibility for the revision of Line 12 and that anyone found responsible in the Attorney General's investigation into what happened would be punished. The victims' families would be looked after, he also assured. Marisol Tapia lives in one of the poorer neighbourhoods in the south of the capital which Line 12 was intended to service. Now, though, she struggles to get through each day. Her son, Brandon Giovanni, was the youngest victim, just 12 years old. Inside her cramped home is a shrine to Brandon, and a montage of photographs of him fills one wall.
To see his empty bedroom, to see children returning to classes and him not among them. His birthday is coming and my son isn't here. These are things that the government don't realize. They don't understand the pain they've caused that night of the 3rd of May. No compensation will bring back my son.
I saw Marisol on the day of the accident in a desperate search for her son at the site of the collapse, as she demanded the authorities do more to locate him. It would take the entire day before he was confirmed as among the dead. The victims' families say the authorities knew that Line 12 was a problem. Soon after it opened, it was shut down for months for urgent repairs, and Marisol is adamant about where the blame should lie.
Marcelo Ebrard, Miguel Ángel Mancera y Claudia Sheinbaum.
She names 2 former mayors of Mexico City, Miguel Ángel Mancera and Marcelo Ebrard, and the current one, Claudia Sheinbaum. She has now filed charges of negligent homicide against them. The BBC approached all 3 for comment, but were told none would be made while the Attorney General's investigation was underway. I'm standing in front of the collapsed section of track, and it brings back the memories of that horrific day in May. Now the rubble has been removed, the twisted and tangled metal long gone, and all that's left is a large open space where the overpass used to be. It is an eerie and unsettling sight. Nearby, the death toll, 26, has been spray-painted onto some of the metro's supporting columns by activists. The families say they've been ignored, even intimidated by the city's authorities in their search for answers. The extent to which Line 12 was built and championed by some of the richest, most powerful and influential people in Mexico was clear at that inauguration ceremony in 2012.
También queremos agradecer al ingeniero Carlos Slim.
Then Mayor Ebrard, who is today Mexico's foreign minister, applauded the launch alongside one of the world's richest men, Carlos Slim, whose construction firm built the line. One of the metro system's former directors, Congressman Jorge Gaviño, says Line 12 was a constant problem during his months in charge.
La línea 12 nace, diría yo, enferma.
I'd say that Line 12 was born unwell. In fact, I'd go as far as to say Line 12 has a cancer. It was built in a hurry. There was a change of the original project, and all of those changes were carried out in a rush. From the construction itself to the purchase of the trains, because there was a sudden change in the technology of the trains.
Marisol's tiny home feels empty without Brandon, and her heartbreak at her loss is at times overwhelming. Justice for Brandon's death may ease her grief a little, but justice is hard to achieve in Mexico at the best of times. In the case of the capital's metro collapse, where the poorest are attempting to take on the country's most powerful elites, there's little to suggest it will be any different this time.
Will Grant reporting from Mexico City. You're listening to NewsHour. And so to come, after 16 years in power, what legacy will Angela Merkel leave for women in Germany?
When you hear about how she actually managed the chancellery, there women were in key positions and she was actually surrounded by women as her closest advisors. But then she, as a chancellor, she never made the woman issue really a topic of her own.
And that report in full in a little over 10 minutes. The latest headlines from the BBC newsroom: a broad opposition coalition in Hungary aiming to oust the Prime Minister Viktor Orban has suspended its candidate selection, saying its systems had come under attack under a suspected cyber attack. US officials are moving thousands of migrants away from a Texas border town that has seen a massive influx, mostly of Haitians, and say there will be increasing expulsion flights. This is Julian Marshall live from the BBC in London. The Greek government has opened a new camp for migrants on the island of Samos, funded to the tune of millions of dollars by the European Union. It's the first of 5 to be constructed on the Aegean Islands, where migrants land after making the sea voyage from Turkey. A huge fire last year in the sprawling, overcrowded Morea camp on the island of Lesbos highlighted the need for better migrant facilities, and the Greek government says these new camps offer dignified living conditions with better accommodation and sanitation. But aid agencies such as MSF have serious misgivings about the levels of security in the camps, as I've been hearing from Patrick Villon, MSF's field coordinator on Samos.
This new camp is presented as something very good for the people coming on the island and then seeking protection by the European Union and Greece. But in fact, we just know by our experience in here and the medical people we've got that putting people in a prison-like camp is not to ameliorate its old health state. For the last 6 months, we had, for instance, 64% of our new MSF patients on the island who had thoughts of suicide or death, and 14% were active risk of suicide. So we know that putting these people in such a prison-like environment is extremely dangerous and medically unadvised.
You call it a prison-like environment. Why do you say that?
Because it is a prison. It is a prison. I mean, it's a highly fenced, double fenced, barbed wire, CCTV, fingerprints to enter and get out. Even a drone is patrolling to check the people about. And it's very isolated. You know, it's in the middle of the island. There's no trees, no nothing. So it's far from the city, 7 kilometers, just to make the life of these people very difficult and impossible. That's the way, because this is the policy of European leaders and local leaders.
But I understood that these camps were a lot more comfortable than the previous camps.
This is what you think, perhaps, but this is not what the people. We are seeing the people in the old camp every day, and they say they don't want to go to this new prison. It may have, electricity and even air conditioner and shipping containers, but this is like a Potemkin village, and if you scratch a little bit the surface, the conditions and the asylum procedures are still very lengthy. It's very complicated. It's announced in a language they don't understand. Services inside will be not better than the old camp in terms of medical care, in terms of psychological support, and it's sold by the government as something very new and very good. But this is just an illusion. It's not reality.
You said that there were still lots of migrants in Turkey waiting to make the crossing. So migrants are still coming across, are they, to Samos and the other Aegean islands?
Yes, they do. I mean, they're trying, but of course now also the tactics from the Greek authorities is to push them back. And some can survive pushbacks, and we are trying to support them. We did it today. Otherwise, I mean, it's clearly pushing back people is the policy nowadays.
So those who do manage to avoid the pushing back of boats and make it to Samos, make it to land, they're the lucky ones, are they?
Yeah, they are pushback survivors in a way. You can call them this way. And they fear to be pushed back anyway, because very often the police or the Hellenic Coast Guards are rounding them up and they put them back on the sea and they tow the dinghy towards the Turkish waters.
MSF's Patrick Villon speaking to me earlier from the Greek island of Samos. So what does the Greek government have to say about the pushback policy that MSF says involves the Coast Guard towing boatfuls of migrants back towards Turkey? And why do the Greek authorities feel the need for such strict security measures at its new migrant camp? Notis Mitheraki is Greece's Minister for Migration and Asylum.
We need to protect people in the camps. There have been numerous problems of violence within the camps over the many years. There have been problems of abuse of women and vulnerable people within the camps. And it's very critical and very important that people sleep safe at night. That is the safety of asylum seekers, the safety of our staff, including NGOs operating in the field, but also the safety of the local community. Don't forget that these camps are not meant for long-term living. They're asylum seekers' initial registration and asylum application processing centers. People shouldn't stay there for more than a few months. And we think at this initial stage where you have people from different ethnicities, providing separate, for example, neighborhoods for unaccompanied minors, single mothers with children, separate neighborhoods for different nationalities will provide a much better living experience for everyone in the camp.
I mean, I can understand that, separating within the camp itself, but I just wondered how barbed wire around the camp protected the inmates from each other.
People can move around, but they need to move around using their magnetic cards. You would find many corporations that do the same. People cannot enter in and out without having a registration card, without going through some security to make sure they don't bring knives into the camp, for example, they don't bring drugs into the camp. So you would have the level of security you should expect in these kind of installations. But people are free to move in and out. I mean, there will be bus services. People can leave if they want and spend the day in the city. If they prefer, they can stay in the camp. They have communal areas, they have restaurants, they have shops, basketball fields, they have playground for the children. The camp is open from 8 in the morning to 8 at night. It remains closed at the night hours.
I mean, a lot of the migrants arriving on these Aegean islands are escaping from persecution. And one of the issues raised by rights groups is that you are constructing camps that are similar to prisons and that you are perhaps having an adverse psychological effect on those who are in them.
Not at all. It is normal security precautions you would find even in sort of residential or any other type of development, which are making sure that people come in and out through the door, but not through jumping from fences.
You said that you expected people only to spend a couple of months in these camps. Does that mean that you have speeded up your processing? Because in the past, in some of these camps, people have been there for about 5 years.
Absolutely, and that has been disgraceful that we had. I think it's a basic human right to receive a prompt and fair response to an asylum claim. 2 years ago, we had 200,000 pending asylum applications. Now the number is below 50,000. We expect that this number will go back to a very low level, just the current applications in the next few months. Currently, we have very few people left in the islands in Samos, and also we expect on the 30th of September to give this camp back to the local community, the old camp, which is it is just next to the city.
Are the authorities on Samos and indeed the other islands, are they still engaged in what is known as pushback, i.e. turning boats around that try to arrive on the islands?
There are specific European Union regulations that provide the kind of interception that can be done in the borders and when boats have to be returned back when they try to illegally cross European Union territorial waters. What I can say is that our Coast Guard and our police does protect the borders, and we are intercepting illegal entries in full respect of what we call international law and regulations about safety at sea and protection of the European border.
I mean, arguably, any boat that approaches one of these Aegean islands with migrants on board is illegal, is it not?
It is, and that's what European regulations provide for. And actually, as you know, we're bordering Turkey, and Turkey is not a country at war. Turkey is a safe country. And people living there many times are being sent through smuggling networks, and many times we have seen that they have been supported by the Coast Guard and authorities of a neighboring country, and that is exactly the opposite of the definition of a refugee.
That was Notis Mitarakis, the Greek Minister for Migration and Asylum, and he was speaking to me from the island of Samos, where he had just attended the opening of the new migrant camp there. Do stay with us here on NewsHour. A lot more to come in the next 30 minutes. Welcome back to NewsHour. Angela Merkel was Germany's first female chancellor and became one of the world's most powerful women. But as she prepares to step down after 16 years in office, her successor will inherit a society where gender inequality is still a big problem. Our Berlin correspondent Jenny Hill reports.
A few autumn leaves stir on the running track as the women of a Berlin athletics club start their warm-up. After 16 years, the Merkel Marathon is coming to an end. And for the amateur athletes here, the country's first female chancellor leaves a powerful legacy, but not a perfect world.
A woman managed to get all the way to the top. That gave us women self-confidence.
So is Germany an equal society, I ask?
No, still no. We saw it in the corona pandemic again. The women stayed at home and managed everything, and the men went to work.
It's still the case that women earn much less than men in the same position. It's high time to change that.
Guten Abend, liebe Zuschauer, herzlich willkommen zum Dreikampf der Spitzenkandidaten.
Germany's next chancellor will most likely be a man.
Wir haben dafür gesorgt, dass Prüfung und Beratung getrennt werden.
Social Democrat Olaf Scholz is considered to have won recent TV debates and he's leading the polls.
Man muss Ihnen die Frage gar nicht stellen, ob Sie mit der Linken koalieren würden, weil Sie
Armin Laschet, who represents Angela Merkel's party, has struggled to enthuse voters so far.
Dem Staat rund 50 Milliarden Euro jährlich durch.
And despite an initial surge in support, Annalena Baerbock of the Greens is lagging behind. The new Chancellor will inherit a country still riven with inequality. Germany has one of the highest gender pay gaps in Europe, and despite an attempt at boardroom quotas, there are few women at the top of business and industry.
Ganz ohne Quote kommen wir nicht voran.
Larissa Zeichhardt is one of them. She manages a firm which installs transport infrastructure.
Hier muss aber erst vor der eigenen Tür gekehrt werden.
We won't get anywhere without quotas, but politics has to get its own house in order. We need significantly more women in administration and government. More important than quotas are conditions. We need financial incentives so that women want to work.
Dass die Frauen überhaupt wollen.
In diesem Sinne kann ich heute bejahend sagen, dann bin ich Feministin.
Angela Merkel, who for so long stood alone on a very male world stage, recently told an interviewer that she'd once hesitated to say she was a feminist, but could do so now. Some have criticised her for not doing more to encourage women in political life. Daniela Schwarzer is a political analyst from the Open Society Foundation.
When you hear about how she actually managed the chancellery, there women were in key positions and she was actually surrounded by women as her closest advisors. But then she, as a chancellor, she never made the woman issue really a topic of her own. So she just was a woman, but she didn't speak about women in politics or feminism.
Daniela Schwarzer ending that report by Jenny Hill in Germany. You're listening to NewsHour from the BBC. I'm Julian Marshall. China's reaction to a new security pact between the US, the UK and Australia designed to counter China's growing assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific is nothing compared to the anger that it's engendered in France. Australia has cancelled a multi-billion-dollar contract to buy diesel-powered submarines from a French company and will instead take delivery of nuclear-powered submarines from the United States. France, which also has security interests in the Indo-Pacific, has called it a stab in the back and a huge mistake by Australia and recalled its ambassador from Canberra and also from Washington. Australia says it understands France's deep disappointment, and the Pentagon says it's been in contact with their French counterparts to calm the diplomatic storm, which looks as if it could take some time to blow over. Nathalie Goulet is a French opposition senator and former vice chair of the Senate's Foreign Affairs and Defence Committee. So why is France so unhappy about what's happened?
Well, the problem is that we feel betrayed, humiliated and betrayed. You know, it's a breach of contract, of course, but then it's a breach of trust. So it's a lot. Coming from our allies, in addition.
Is the major problem for France that you've lost this submarine contract, or that three of your allies have formed a defence pact which excludes France?
First of all, I think it's a question of proceeding, and then it's both of what you said. What I cannot understand is that this story happened overnight. We don't understand if we had warnings, if there is a misunderstanding of the contract or a breach of technology support or something, because you don't break this kind of contract overnight. Australia negotiated with France for this contract, for this submarine contract. And this thing was absolutely perfect in 2016. And all of a sudden, they said, we don't change our mind, we change our needs. Okay? So we have rules, and we are under the impression that Australia didn't follow the rules to break this contract.
So who do you blame most? Do you blame Australia for breaking the contract? Do you blame the United States for offering Australia an alternative?
I don't blame anybody. Right now, I would like to understand how it works, okay? I understand that Australia has new needs, and those new needs allowed Australia to break a very important contract, which has a lot of impact on the French strategy in the area. So it's like a domino, effect or butterfly effect that will impact tremendously the French position in the area. And then we have to review something looking like a European defense, our role in NATO, the trust that we can put in our allies. Because, when you feel betrayed, first you are very angry and then you want to react. Okay, so first we withdraw our ambassadors and blah, blah, blah. But I think that we have to think deeper on this situation, and we have to have a fair analysis of the situation and know how it happens.
That's pretty big, the French rethinking their relations with NATO, their role within NATO as a result of this. Is that really going to happen?
What I'm saying is after this kind of slap, you have to sit and think seriously about what you want to do and how you have to manage with your allies. Because obviously, this very important story brought huge mistrust. And you cannot have any defense agreement between people with this kind of mistrust. So we had the Afghanistan story, we had other story, we have the Brexit, which was also difficult to swallow because we had a lot of agreement, a defense agreement also with UK and European defense. And the European defense right now is a dream. Maybe we have to make it come true.
The United States says it's taking steps to mend relations with France. How can France be pacified, do you think, at the moment?
I think that it's too early. We are a member of the Security Council. We have a big army. Because it's a worldwide humiliation. So we have not to react immediately. I think that withdrawing our ambassador was already a very important reaction, and it's a high level. But then I think that these things will require a defense council and see with our ally in European Union and see how we have to react properly at the right level and with the right words or the right action.
It occurs to me that this could be potentially politically damaging for President Macron ahead of those presidential elections in April 2022.
Sure it will. Sure it will, because he was the Minister of Economy who signed the contract in 2016. And then this humiliation, of course, will damage his image, of course.
That was Nathalie Goulet, a French opposition senator, and I'm joined now live by Brad Sherman, US Democratic congressman and senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And Congressman, firstly, what's your understanding of how this pact came about and how Australia decided to use US nuclear subs rather than going through with that contract with France?
Well, those are separate issues. We have a defense relationship with Australia. I think this new gloss on it is the least important of the developments. The bigger development is what this new submarine contract means for our relationship with China, both Australia's and the United States. And then it's the French reaction to losing the business. I have my stock in trade as being a business attorney. I believe that this agreement has dozens of pages in it designed to outline Australia's rights to back out of the contract and to move in another direction. And if you sign a contract that involves a cancellation procedure and cancellation payments, you shouldn't be surprised if the other contracting party makes use of those provisions. So
France is, if you like, crying wolf when it complains about Australia breaking off this contract?
Well, look, they're losing $40 to $50 billion worth of contract work. They may receive tens of millions of cancellation fees, which is a very small consolation prize. They're obviously disappointed and lashing out. And yet at the same time, American contractors, both in the defense and other areas, often have contracts canceled. That's why the contracts go on for pages about the rights of the purchasing party to cancel if there has been a delay in delivering the product or if there hasn't been a delay. And that's why it's my understanding this contract lays out tens of millions of dollars of contract cancellation fees. If Australia had an obligation under the contract that they were weaseling on, then I think France would have a stronger argument. But I can see why they're disappointed.
Why did the United States choose the UK as to be a part of this pact rather than France, which arguably has greater security concerns in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, I think that the focus here is on the defense of Australia, and there are much closer UK-Australia defense ties. And both the UK and France have island possessions in the Indo-Pacific. I think the naval presence of the UK may be larger, but the focus also was on this contract for nuclear subs, which does include some UK technology and participation. So I think ultimately this agreement will be strengthened if you can add France and New Zealand, and after that, and add Japan, South Korea, and India. But the pact simply reinforces existing agreements. But I'd like to get India and Japan in the same agreement.
So there is a possibility that the pact could be extended to include France, you're saying?
Certainly, and it should be, but I think that'd be politically impossible for the next several years, given the economic disappointment. But there's another way aspect of this is China, I think, correctly decries the idea of a naval buildup in the Indo-Pacific. Of course, China's doing it themselves. And that's why we ought to have a conference to limit naval deployments in the Indo-Pacific region and to see whether China is really willing to limit its own naval buildup, or whether they just think that other countries shouldn't have nuclear subs while they do.
How do you interpret the level of French anger at the moment? The latest is from the French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian speaking on French television, and he is accusing the United States and Australia of lying, duplicity, and a major breach of trust and contempt towards France.
I don't think there's any contempt towards France. Australia thought that the best diesel subs were made in France and signed the contract, then determined that they wanted nuclear subs and determined that the best nuclear subs were made in the United States. Now, I know France also makes nuclear subs. We also make diesel subs. And when Australia, which depends far more on the United States for its defense than France, signed the contract 4 years ago with France, we didn't call that a betrayal, even though, let's face it, Australia's defense relationship with the United States is the linchpin of its national security. And France has some islands in the Indo-Pacific area. So we didn't call it a betrayal when the Australians decided to buy diesel subs from France. And I don't think it's a betrayal when Australia decides that if they want nuclear subs, they should come to the United States.
Nathalie Goulet, the French opposition senator, mentioned in passing that France maybe would have to consider its position, its role within NATO. She didn't give it an awful lot of consideration. But, I mean, is that something that occurs to you, that maybe the NATO alliance has been undermined by all this?
Well, France has had sometimes a very good relationship, in prior decades, not such a good relationship with NATO. I think there's a lot of anger. You even heard her say that Brexit was a problem, and I don't think that the United States or Australia are responsible for Brexit in any way. But France did not like to see Brexit. They liked getting a contract. They don't like losing a contract. I suspect that a year or two, this will be water under the bridge. But
Congressman, I've got to cut you off there. I'm afraid we're running out of time. Brad Sherman, U.S. Democratic Congressman and senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, many thanks. A reminder of our top story this hour. UN agencies have urged the Taliban in Afghanistan to reopen girls' secondary schools without delay on the day boys began returning to the classroom. Speaking in NewsHour, Pashtana Durrani, executive director of the non-profit Learn Afghanistan, called for girls' education to be resumed.
Because the more girls graduate, the more they will enroll in colleges, the more they will become professionals, and the more they will be paying taxes that will be helping sustain the country where we won't be needing a lot of aid. I just don't understand the notion where they think it's totally okay. If they're using Sharia or Islam, that doesn't justify it.
And the top story from the BBC Newsroom, the French Foreign Minister says relations with Australia and the United States are in crisis because of what he called the pair's duplicity, contempt and lies over a new security alliance. You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Marshall, and this is NewsHour. We heard earlier in the programme about the Taliban announcing a return to secondary school for boys but not girls. This diktat from the Education Ministry is the latest move from the Taliban, which would seem to threaten women's rights. This week, the Women's Ministry was renamed the Ministry for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, a department notorious for the strict enforcement of Sharia law during the Taliban's last period of rule. After the Taliban were ousted in 2001, significant progress was made in women's education and female emancipation, but those gains are now at risk. BBC journalist Sana Safi's story is the story of so many women in Afghanistan who benefited from that opening up, but also lived under the Taliban's previous dark rule. Sana and her family had to move around many times during the civil war that preceded the Taliban takeover in the 1990s, and during Taliban rule, she attended 3 underground schools.
The first thing that happened after 9/11 and after the US-led invasion of Afghanistan was that schools opened. And I was one of the first girls who went and enrolled at my local school. Because of the underground schools, they took an exam, an entrance exam from everybody. By then I was old enough, I was about 12, I think. And I was said that, okay, you've done some work. So because we haven't got any classes beyond grade 4, you will sit in the highest class. That's where you can start your education from. If there was any higher class than grade 4, then I would have gone there, but there was nothing. So I said, okay, fine. This is slightly a demotion as well. I'm going to be wasting my time, but sure, I will sit in this class and continue. So that's what I did. And then I had to take 2 classes in a year in order to catch up because I was old by then for my age. During that period, by then we had moved from the south of Afghanistan to the east of Afghanistan, where my paternal uncles and aunts were living. And the reason for that move was because when 9/11 happened, there was so much instability. People didn't know what was going on. So they said, okay, we needed to be together with the extended family just to have safety in numbers if something was to go wrong again. So that's why we moved. And an uncle of mine then decided that we needed a private tutor to come to the house on days off and after schooling to give us extra classes, especially in subjects like maths and science-related subjects. And my education from then blossomed, and I was ahead of my peers at school.
How was it growing up in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021, free from the repression of the Taliban?
I was in Afghanistan when I was born, 1989 until 2002, but my family, the rest of them were there. For me personally, the Taliban regime was one of isolation, one of fear, one of uncertainty, and emotional turbulence, because my family went through so much and I went through so much and I could see it. I didn't have any friends during the Taliban regime. I only spent time with my parents and the few adults I knew. Then after school started, after the US invasion, it got better in a sense that I went to school, an official school. I kind of worked out how society worked because there were other people that I could speak to and communicate with, and I was out of my own head. But I also had a lot to do. There was this rush. I never believed that what we had in Afghanistan, or the democracy that we suddenly found, was going to be there for long. So I needed to grab every opportunity that was coming my way.
And were you aware in any way that there was this disparity maybe over the past 20 years between the towns and the cities and the countryside, and the kind of freedoms that women were enjoying in urban settings were perhaps not being replicated in the countryside?
Very much so, because I could see it within my own extended family. I benefited from whatever was in Afghanistan in the last 20 years because A, I lived in the cities, B, my mother and my parents had the vision and the willingness and I think the resources in some sense to invest. And also I was living in the cities. My sisters the same way, but the cousins that continue to live in the countryside, they didn't benefit from this. I still have family in Helmand. I still have family in the east. I still have family in the north. Their lives were at a crossfire in a way because their fields, their homes, their land became a front line of the war.
This week, the Taliban renamed the Women's Ministry the Ministry for the Promotion of Virtue, the Prevention of Vice, a department which, of course, they created during their last period in power. Can you remember what that department did?
I do, and I talk about this in the documentary. That ministry was responsible for policing the lives of individuals. If a woman was out on the streets with some flesh showing, then she would be flogged. If men didn't go to mosque on time, for example, bang on time, 5 times a day, then they would go and flog them and lash them and force them to go to the mosque. If there was a wedding, like my cousins, I talk about this in the documentary, and they heard there was music playing, then they would raid the wedding party and take the groom to the prison.
Western governments are now faced with a dilemma when it comes to engaging with the Taliban. They obviously find them very distasteful in terms of the values that they hold. Do you feel, though, that they should be trying to engage with the Taliban?
I understand the dilemma, but I also understand the reality. The reality is that Afghanistan is a country of more than 30 million people. Only 130,000 people were evacuated. The rest are grappling with this impending humanitarian crisis. They need to go to school, they need shelter, they need food, they need safety. And for that to happen, there has to be some sort of international engagement with the country because we cannot allow a country of that many people to starve. It's morally wrong, it's ethically wrong. We cannot allow that situation to happen. If there is no international engagement, then that's definitely going to happen because how are those people going to survive? I'm getting calls from my school friends, from my school teacher even, a chemistry teacher of mine called me the other day and she said, it has been 3 weeks that I've not gone to school and I've been at home. And it has been nearly 3 months that I've not received my salary. And I've got 3 kids that I need to feed. And my husband used to work with different projects. And now, obviously, he doesn't have the work. So I'm desperate. Can you help me? And I'm receiving hundreds of calls like that. These are professionals. They've had jobs. They were self-sufficient. So I think without an engagement, the situation is going to get worse for Afghans as well as the international community.
BBC journalist Sana Safi, and you can hear her documentary Afghanistan and Me on the BBC World Service today. And that's it from this edition of News Hour. From me, Julian Marshall, and the rest of the team in London, goodbye.
News NewsHour has been a download from the BBC. To discover more and our terms of use, visit bbc.com/podcasts.